What diversity and inclusion means. Jedi training presented by the Mid-Hudson Library System. These self-paced trainings are meant to help library staff members discover more about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, not only in the workplace but the world at large. The questions asked throughout these trainings are meant for private reflection. What is diversity? Sometimes it's what you see, gender, skin color, age, physical abilities. Sometimes it's what you don't see. Ethnicity, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, values, beliefs, and personality. Our differences define us and allow us to make unique contributions. Once we understand how diversity can allow us to create solutions to problems, because it allows all of us to have and give unique contributions, we understand the need for diversity in the workplace. But diversity is just the first step. Inclusion allows us to hear and be heard. Watch the following video from Verna Myers, where she explains that diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. You guys are beautiful. Do you understand, I do a lot of this work at the highest level of organization, and often there are not a lot of women in the room. You know what? That's why we're here. That's why we're talking about it. So I just thought I could just give you a moment to take it all in by turning to your neighbor and saying, "You are awesome." Just turn to your neighbor.
You're awesome.
Right? And wait, the other neighbor, don't feel left out, because I want you to tell your other neighbor, "I'm so glad you decided to come today." Yes.
Really glad you. Me too.
It just feels so good to be in a room with fantastic, powerful women, hearing from brilliant women, talking about some of the wonderful ways that we have learned to lead. And so today I really wanted to talk to you from the point of view of something that I think is essential for every leader, and this is the idea of inclusion. You know, I don't think Donya didn't say this, but I'm a recovering attorney. I know there's some attorneys in the room there who have not recovered. But I come from a space where the representation of women is very low, especially as you move up to the top. We're really looking at 19-20% of partners, women. And also, if we are just looking at women of color, we're really talking about 2% of them are in the partnership role. We're also talking about the fact that we have done a lot better in corporate world, but it's still, if you go way, way up to the CEOs in the Fortune 500, we're talking 4.4% of the CEOs in that Fortune 500 are women. We're also talking about 0.4 of those women, people of color. Women of color, actually. And if we look at the boards, that's looking a little bit better. We've got 19%, 3% of them are women of color. But as we start to move up, we know that it gets thinner. And so today I wanted to talk to you not just from the point of view of what we need to do and encourage our male sort of colleagues to do, but I also want to talk about inclusion from the point of view of what we need to do as women. Is that okay? I feel like it's a two-way street, and I want us to use what we already know to do a better job in this way. So I thought I would start off by just sharing from my law school. That's Harvard Law School. 1953 is the first year that they decided to allow women to go. And I don't know if you've heard the story yet, but when they got there were no restrooms. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. Yeah, they worked really hard to figure out what to do, and then when they did it, they forgot the toilets for the women. And the women said, you know how we are? You know how we are. We're like, Thank you so much.
Okay.
We're so happy to be here. But where are we going to pee? You know, like we don't want to make a problem here and everything, but it wouldn't be quite fair because we have tests and we have classes and we have to go to the restroom. And they had to go to the restroom down in the center, like Harvard Square. And so the men actually said that they had a good point there, and they put a toilet in the janitor's closet in the basement. So here's what I'm saying. In 1953, I would say that Harvard Law School had gender diversity. I would not say they had gender inclusion. So I gave you the numbers, but more and more we start to understand that if those numbers are ever going to go anywhere, it's not about counting, it's about cultivating. It's about relationship. It's about supporting. And so I want to talk to you about what inclusion is, which it is promoting an environment, a climate where people of every background, they feel like not only are they respected, but they are reflected and they're expected. In other words, when you come in the room, people are not assigning you to the corner or asking you for the lunch menu. To be expected is to be presumed to be there because you are the head and you said you were the head. So I'm not sure why you can't understand that I'm the head and why you're asking me to order lunch. So it's a lot about expectations. It's about being reflected in that culture. And it's also about being respected. It's also about being integrated and feeling welcomed, and your voice is being heard and your ideas are being solicited, and you feel like you have an equal opportunity to succeed. That's the whole piece of it. Now, so that's why I say diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. It is a very different level of engagement when people feel, do we want to go back to middle school? Maybe not, but some of us had a good run. Others of us don't ever want to talk about it. But remember those weird little mixers where you were sort of on the side and hoping that someone would ask you to dance? It was really awkward. If you were straight in particular, you were hoping that there would be these little boys. The boys were shorter in middle school. It was awkward. But it was all about am I going to get into the dance? Because I'm here, but I'm on the floor. Am I on the floor? And will I be asked? And you know what? We can make up a lot of things for ourselves. But right now, what we notice is that certain people are the host of these particular environments. And without them actually inviting you on the mainstream. So where is John, the fabulous John? Did he leave? I love the idea that he chose her. And I love the idea that she accepted it. It wasn't all perfect, as the other Geraldine talked about. It wasn't perfect. It was like she didn't even have experience. He's like, you know what? Let's make this work. That's what we mean when we say someone is inviting you to dance. And you don't have to have all the dance steps, as we heard earlier, but you got to actually have the opportunity to show what you're capable of doing. So there are really wonderful ways that inclusion benefits us all in any kind of project and any kind of division and company. However, there are barriers. So I want to talk to you about the barriers. And I want to talk to you the barriers as women from a point of view of a woman and a woman of color. I have been watching myself trying to move through some of what it means to walk in inclusion. And so I thought I would talk to you about the barriers. One of the barriers is this idea called organizational preference. And believe me, women get caught up in it too. Organizational preference is that a group of people get together and they create something, and they create that something to work for them. And it's not because they're bad people or mean people. It's just that's generally what we do as people. We create something that flows for us. A problem is that when we say we want difference and we invite in different people, many times we're trying to do that but not do anything different. Organizational preference says we're looking for the person who looks most like the people who are already there. We've got a very narrow perspective of what the right person, the right way to talk, the right way to work, the right way to dress, all of that is very precise. And maybe it's not said out loud, but it's in the culture. It's in the water. And this is an idea that Kenji Yoshino from New York Law School is talking about called covering. That often we begin to cover the aspects of ourselves that is different from everyone else who's there, who's in the lead, in order to survive. And what I have seen for women also is sometimes we go way overboard. We're more critical sometimes. We're like, I don't think she's gonna make it. Not with that hairstyle. You know, and so we are already like, you know, because we're afraid or we're successful. We're successful in that environment. And so sometimes we're trying to give the best advice, like, honey, I know you want to cry, but we don't cry here. And you're like, okay, do we cry like in our offices? No, we don't cry anywhere. You know, like, really? Because that's not what's happening. So there are right? I mean, one thing is a strategy, and another thing is actually like you're telling a person that they're not as good or they're doing something weird and strange, and that makes people what? They can survive for a period of time, but it gets exhausting. And when your really fabulous talent people decide they're leaving, you're like, she was so fabulous. I mean, where's she going? You ran her out. So let us think about our own preferences and the ways in which we are thinking about who can do this particular job or who's going to be successful. You know what? I came up when we were wearing those weird little ties too. Is Geraldine still here? We had the button down. It was not pretty. People thought, where's Nithya? I'm looking at Nithya. Thank you so much for having me, Nithya. I really appreciate it. And Catherine also. When I'm looking at you guys, you look fabulous. We couldn't practice law. Like in 1985, they were like, you may not be able to practice law in pants. This is not possible, right? I'm not even lying to you. So we do have some progress that we're seeing things differently, but it is still some stuff that's embedded. Here's the problem. We all are looking at the world through our own particular lens, our own way of shaping and understanding the world, okay? And let me tell on myself, that's me in China. It's my first time. Nobody told me people were going to be staring at me, right? So I was like, I wish I was to tell you that as a diversity cultural specialist, which I am, I said, oh, what an interesting cultural experience. That's not what I said. What did I say? What's up? Like, why are you staring at me, right? And so, but then I got a hold of myself, and then I went and talked to my cultural informant, who was a Asian guy who had been working there and was from China and worked in the U.S. And I said, are people staring at me? He said, yeah, people are staring at you. I was like, but why are people staring at me? He said, well, they've never seen you before. I mean, never seen a person who looks like you before. And one of the things, I was like, really? And then he said, oh, and by the way, we have no prohibition against staring. I don't know how many of you in the room had the mother that I had, but my mother was very serious about the staring thing. She was like, we do not stare at people. In fact, if someone could be naked walking down the street, and I'd be like, naked? No, we do not. Let me just see, did anybody have those mothers? Okay, so a few of us. Let me tell you, my mother did such a great job on like just hammering this into my being that I thought it was universal. You got to ask yourself, how many messages did you get growing up from the people you trusted that you think are universal, that everybody should be this way, look this way, act this way, whatever? The other thing I brought to China that was completely wrong and useless was my Black American lens. Okay, so as a Black American, if people are staring at you, it's generally not good. Okay, let me just say, historically, it hasn't been a good thing. So generally, if you're staring at me, it's either like you don't want me, you don't think I should be there, or something's bad's going to go down. After talking to my cultural informant, I went back out the next day. I start waving. What do they do? Yes, they do. And I'm in a bunch of like super random photos with Chinese families. But it was awesome. It was awesome. And it was actually a real lesson for me about how my worldview is not the only view. So this is true about all of us. How are you interpreting? How are you communicating? How are you evaluating talent? okay? Because culture impacts everything. We think we have just like this rational idea about what's happening here and whether that person is confident and whether that person is presenting herself in a way that shows a lot of confidence and all of that. Let me tell you, culture impacts how we communicate. Whether we leave a little space in between what that person just said and what we said. Or whether we stand up and say everything about who we are and what we've done and what our titles are, or whether we're like, yeah, so it would kind of be nice, like maybe, I'm not saying, but I think I know about this. So those things are culturally determined often how we evaluate, how we support performance, who we think is smart, what we think smart looks like. All of that, who we want to be with, who we trust sort of implicitly, how we understand family, what our values are, all of those things are impacting the idea of inclusion, who we're bringing into our circle, who we're walking toward, who we're giving an extra chance to. Let me tell you about the extra chance part of it, and that's a lot about unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is slightly different than our cultural view. Our cultural view is sort of allowing us to see some things and missing some other things and maybe applying the wrong assessment. But this idea about our brain and unconscious bias, it is not about the fact that we are bad people holding negative stereotypes about other folks. In fact, what I'd like us all to do today is to say out loud, I have biases. Are you prepared to do that with me? It's very therapeutic. Okay, are you ready? I have biases. We must get out of denial if we hope to be inclusive leaders around our biases, because everybody has them, and it's because of how our brain sorts through a lot of material very quickly. We do in-group, out-group, and we also do what this looks like and how this sort of hooks up with how I see the world. So there's sort of schemas that go together for us, okay? So as a result, we have this amazing, it wasn't even a study, it was actually what happened, that when orchestra auditions became blind, as in the person who was looking or listening to the person who was performing could not see who they were and did not know their name, boom, all of a sudden, the number of women in U.S. orchestras increased 5-fold. Just because you can't see who's playing, which is to say that sometimes when we're seeing, we're missing. That something about what we see and the schema that we have in our mind about who is an amazing orchestra player is set up to cause us to move away from merit and move closer to preference or what makes sense in the thing that our brain has already set up. We call this the illusion of objectivity. Just a few days ago, MIT came out with a study where they looked at 9,000 employees and discovered that even though this company was saying we're all about merit, it turns out that people who have the exact same performance, same position, same tenure in the organization, that people of color, people outside of the United States, and people who were women were getting much less in the way of salary increases. And they were able to say, you know what? The problem is when you think you are a meritocratic organization, that's when you're going to miss your bias. So if you can't get out of denial, you can't actually adjust and see, ooh, maybe I'm applying the wrong lens here, or maybe I have a bias that either makes me move towards someone or against someone without looking at the real criteria. So here's an example. Bill, a SVP, was talking to Jessica and Charles, two people he manages in the division. During the conversation, Bill says, my wife used to be a senior manager, but she decided to stay home with the kids. She couldn't be good at her job and a good mother at the same time. Both Jessica and Charles are parents. Heard that before? Yes, someone said, yes, yesterday. So this is what we call prescriptive bias, which is that women are often, and it's not just women, lots of ideas in our brain about who gets to do what. And prescriptive bias is like, I'm prescribing what area in which you can operate well. I want to show you another thing too. A law firm partner was having a difficult time calming down the GC of a client company. The GC was constantly at odds with the board chair and the CEO about the direction of the company. Every time the partner sat down with the GC, they had to discuss how impossible the chair was and how little accountability there was for the CEO's action. You read it? You see it? Now tell me, what's the gender of all the roles? Anybody have a woman in that role? Any of those roles? Just a few. Descriptive bias means we miss who could be leaders because we've decided that leaders come in a gender already. We don't believe it explicitly, but it comes out and it impacts our choices and who we look for and who we see and whether we can even notice leadership in folks who are looking at a different package than we expect. How do I know this? Okay, let me tell you about the diversity lady. Was on a plane, was feeling good, heard the voice of a female pilot coming over the PA system, was in love, was shaking pom-poms for diversity of women in the sky. Then it started getting turbulent and bumpy. And I was like, ooh, I hope she can drive. Didn't know it was biased, ladies. Didn't know it was biased until I was coming back on the other leg and it's a guy driving. It's always a guy driving. It's often turbulent and bumpy. I've never questioned the competence of the pilot ever. So in my worldview, the explicit idea, I believe that women are awesome, especially if they've gotten that far. But it turns out when things are bumpy and turbulent, I lean on a bias I didn't even know I had, an unconscious bias. You know, big tube in the sky going very fast, I want a guy. So let me tell you what we can do about it. One is promoting inclusion looks like reflecting on your own experiences, your own background. How did you feel? Were you feeling included when you first came in the company? Why did you feel included? What do you wish someone would have done? Could you do more? Consider your own behavior. What messages are you sending about how inclusive you are? Small things matter. Names matter. Don't make up people's names. Don't give them, don't touch people's hair. They're like a lot of small things. Don't ask transgender people about their body parts. Just think about, that's not even small. Think about people's holidays, meeting times, when you're doing it, when you're not doing it. Notice who isn't being included on everything, like calls, like meetings, like breaks, like lunches, like when you are here right now. Who are you moving towards? Who are you not even thinking about talking to? Break through that today in these breaks that we have. Ask questions about people's careers and their projects and their teams. Notice the language you're using. Establish feedback loops, surveys, checking in with people, and know how to acknowledge, this already got said, consider new ideas. And if you don't accept that idea, please explain why you haven't. The last couple things I want to say is you got to stay on top of your bias. There's no way to do this work now that we have all the research about unconscious bias without being on top of them. So go looking for your biases. Go see who you get excited about without even knowing who they are. Looking at resumes. What do you focus on? And who have you mentored? And are there any patterns? Who do you share information with? And then most importantly, to weaken your biases, you got to slow down. You've got to slow the judgment down. You've got to actually invite more information and look for the information that doesn't go with what you think about the world already. And then you've got to get uncomfortable, which was already said. Build relationships across different, feel awkward, feel weird, until you move into the comfort and to deeper relationships. And that helps to actually push against the bias. Interrupt bias. Don't let people say things that are crazy. And we have friends, and also it's the holiday. You're sitting at the table with grandma, you're like, grandma's a bigot. I didn't even know. Who knew, right? So you got to start thinking about these things and thinking about who else is at the table. The kids are at the table. And when we wonder why we're not moving and why we have these issues on the street and why even in the C-suite we still aren't moving, it's because we are not proactively anti-bias. You can't be passively anti-bias. You've got to be proactive about it. So I am grateful to have an opportunity to talk to you. I'm going to ask you to move down that spectrum as often as you can. And I'm also going to tell you, take some risk, because that's how we become more inclusive. And as a result, that's how we move women and all folks forward. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Further readings. How to Be an Inclusive Leader, Jennifer Brown. Moving Diversity Forward, Verna Myers.